Welcome to Not Entirely Unlike Tea with Christine Collins. Hey there, it's Christine Collins, and today we have a really interesting subject around language patterns. There is so much happening under the surface of the language that we're using, and often without even realizing it, we are sending intentional or unintentional messages to the people that we're speaking to. There is a lot of neuroscience behind things like emotional temperature, power positioning, and the different aspects of language that are actually influencing our conversations and even our broadcast language. And that directly affects how the message gets received on the other end. Every email, every conversation, every social media post, or piece of content that you're sharing is carrying some of these invisible markers, including your emotional patterns, your belief system, and sometimes even unprocessed early experiences. And most people have no idea that they're communicating these things. So starting off with looking at things like power dynamics, we can look for patterns in language, such as things like sorry to bother you, or just wondering, or I know you're busy, but also minimizing language, the words just, only, quick, small, and tiny, where you're downplaying whatever it is you're requesting or asking for, almost apologetically. Even things like permission seeking. Would it be okay if? Is it all right if? Do you mind if? Would you consider? Other elements like more self-deprecating language, beginning a line with, I'm not an expert, but this might sound silly, but. And then there's over-explaining, justifying even simple requests with paragraphs of backstory as if we needed to earn the right to take up that space. And often these things actually misfire and create the opposite of what we were hoping to accomplish. And when it comes to content creation, they can play out in that as well, when we are hedging authority along the lines of, I'm still learning this, but, or this worked for me, but it may not work as well for you. Even downplaying your offers. This is just a quick little guide. It's only $47. Or asking permission just to exist. Things like, would you be interested in, or if this resonates. Now, it's also important to mention the extreme opposite end of this power dynamic language that is overly forceful and unnecessarily so, and I would say even invasive in its communication style. These are phrases like, you need to, ... You should, ... You must, ... Presumptive language that assumes agreement or even further assumes power and authority before even finishing the message. It's a pressure tactic that creates urgency without rationale. And these differences create power dynamics above or below the receiver. And it's actually neurological. Your brain's default social positioning is wired in childhood through repeated interactions with authority figures or caregivers, and the prefrontal cortex is learning where you belong in terms of those hierarchies through various different pattern recognition. So if you grew up in a position where you had to make yourself smaller in order to stay safe, your brain now has automated that response. It's not something that you're thinking through anymore. It happens on its own. And these aren't character flaws, they are survival adaptations that worked at one point but may not be effective anymore. It's an adaptation created by the nervous system but is still running on autopilot without being re-evaluated or questioned. Because our amygdala tags those authority figures in childhood as potential threats, we develop language patterns and appeasement strategies that was needed by that younger self, as well as in the opposite case with the patterns of demanding presumptive language, often comes from a nervous system that somehow learned that dominance equals safety. And in many cases, both can equally backfire. So power dynamics are one aspect of messaging that's coming through beneath the surface of language by the language choices that are being given. Another element is emotional temperature and connection with that audience. So asking whether there are warmth indicators like genuine curiosity, a human moment, a vulnerable moment, or if there's a high level of coldness where the language is overly formal, overly robotic, using corporate speak, and there may be gaps in authenticity where the voice or language feels forced. And in terms of vulnerability, it can be a mix. It could go one end of the spectrum where you're too guarded, too formal, too distant, too cold, or the other end of the spectrum where the person is oversharing in ways that make other people feel uncomfortable because they have not had that relationship built in a way that that sharing actually makes sense. So we can consider this element as well when we're sharing out content or having other types of communication and interpersonal reactions. That balance between overly cold or overly open and evaluating the nature of the relationship in front of us and deciding what the appropriate level of warmth and connection is for that moment. One of the things we can do to help to build this for ourselves is in regulating the nervous system, because when we feel safe, our ventral vagal complex allows for us to have more warmth, more playfulness, more creativity, and more authentic connection. When we're more relaxed, that social engagement system helps us to best deliver our message. But when the nervous system is feeling threat detection, we're shifting into hypervigilance, we're extremely nervous or feeling unsafe, we can sometimes fluctuate between that overly formal, very distant, overly professional tone or a flat, robotic quality. So in nervous system regulation, where we support our nervous system in a way that allows that relaxation to happen, we're able to communicate more authentically and in a more connected way. And as we're talking about these different aspects of underlying language, one of the most key elements in terms of broadcast content in a marketing sense is the distinction between pain dialing versus desire-focused messaging. And often is where we see the biggest gap between what people think they're communicating and the message that's actually coming across to their audience. So pain dialing could be described as really dwelling and focusing very heavily on problems. And I'm not talking about just mentioning a challenge that the audience is facing. I'm talking about dialing up the pain, making that person feel broken, using fear-based motivation, using shame triggers. Are you still struggling with blank? You need to stop making this mistake. Your content isn't working. That's in contrast to desire-focused messaging, where you may discuss the challenge. You may identify the problem that the person is facing with compassion, but the focus is on looking at the hope, the possibility, the potential to solve the problem, to have a better experience, to move into a better feeling life, and the promise of transformation, the opportunity to access that hope, build that foundation, remove those feelings of brokenness and desperation, and learn how to solve the problem, learn how to focus on the solution. The thing that a lot of people don't understand about pain-based messaging is that while it can attract attention and is often used for quick clicks, it also activates the threat response system in the audience, especially if it's speaking directly to them about a topic that's important to them. You're putting the reader's nervous system into a state of distress for the effort of motivating them to make a purchase so that they can experience relief from the pain that you're dialing. Not only is that a little bit unethical, but it also trains that same audience to associate you with feeling bad about themselves. Their amygdala begins to tag your content as a threat stimulus. And even if they make that purchase, even if they buy the thing this time, you have not built a relationship of trust. You have created a cycle of negative emotion. And while it may work in the short term to make a quick sale, that long-term association that their brain has now created with feeling bad about themselves means that once they begin to feel better, and it probably won't happen from the pain dialing marketer, but it may come somewhere along the line, they will be so done with that pain dialing marketing company that they'll never want to think about them again. On the other hand, focusing on the desire, the hope, the potential, the possibility, activates a different system in the brain, motivating an approach system, a toward motivating system, circuitry that's powered by dopamine, excitement, and even love. You're creating attraction versus avoidance. and associating your presence or your product or your service or your thing with possibility rather than pain. And this is one of the reasons why it works so well in the long term, because it is creating a relationship with the audience that is based on your desire to help them, not on your willingness to hurt them to make a sale. You're speaking to their very real lived experience, still acknowledging their challenge or their pain or their problem, but without dialing it up in a way that makes them feel broken and like you're the only way that they can make it better. You can validate their reality and their lived experience while at the same time painting a picture of what's possible for them. So while the pain-based messaging activates that avoidance system, that away-focused messaging, it activates the amygdala, the stress response, the cortisol, the fight or flight circuitry, taking the prefrontal cortex partially offline, so it actually removes some of the decision-making capacity. Then people buy out of fear or shame, but they don't feel good about it, and they don't become loyal long-term customers. Whereas desire-based messaging activates the approach system, or the toward motivated system, the nucleus accumbens, and the dopamine pathways associated with anticipating reward and more positive emotional experiences. The desire, the wanting, the goal-directed behavior associated with positive emotion. Working with the brain's natural motivation architecture instead of against it. And in terms of some of these different language choices, much of it can be layered with our past experiences, childhood trauma, various different negative life experiences, whether as a child or as an adult. And until we learn how to recognize it, it sort of happens on autopilot. So things like people-pleasing is one, over-accommodating, struggling to say no. There may be excessive reassurance seeking. Is this okay? Let me know if this doesn't work for you. It's whatever you prefer. Even perfectionism, like over-editing, hedging every statement, needing everything to be completely flawless and perfect before it's ready to share. And also scarcity mindset, so giving away too much for free, undercharging, having kind of that desperate energy that actually pushes people away, even though that wasn't the intention. And how this manifests in areas like content or in offers or sales pitches. So the people-pleasing might show up like, I'll create custom everything for you. I'll do whatever you need. Of course I can add that, no problem. Oh, you're only available tomorrow? I'll make it work. So terrible boundaries, and ultimately that leads to resentment and burnout. Being unwilling to ask your clients for testimonials, never accepting help even when it's offered by other people because asking or accepting that feels dangerous. And then the perfectionism, basically just never launching, never sharing, never posting, never getting started because it's not perfect yet, or even rewriting that sales page a billion times. And then with the scarcity mindset, language like, I know this seems expensive, but, or giving away the entire framework for free because you're afraid that nobody will actually pay for it. A lot of these tendencies developed somewhere in the past along the way because approval from others equaled safety. The brain somewhere along that way learned that if I can just make them happy, I'll be okay. And this is even more common with people who are intuitive, people who are empaths, who experience other people's emotions very strongly. They work very hard to get everybody else in the room comfortable and happy because that's what allows them to feel more comfortable and happy. And that's where boundaries can be extremely helpful, particularly emotional boundaries. And then perfectionism has emerged because mistakes had really negative consequences, whether that was criticism or withdrawal of love or some form of punishment in the past. The brain has learned, I have to be flawless in order to be acceptable. And that creates that hyperactivity in detecting your own errors and making everything absolutely perfect. So while some of these things can be semi-functional for a period of time, when taken to extreme, they can actually inhibit our success and our creativity. It's not a personality trait that can't be changed. It's merely the brain's neurological adaptation to an experience. And we can retrain our brain to create new patterns, new habits, new experiences. And this is one of many reasons why tools like hypnosis are very powerful, because without fully understanding it, we're often operating from a deep subconscious script that has been written by our past experiences, traumas, childhood, and adulthood, and has been developed and ingrained over time. And the more times that we keep practicing the same patterns of behavior and language over a span of many years, the deeper the grooves are cut. We just keep tracing over them again and again and again until they become a full habit. But habits can be changed, patterns can be broken, and neural wiring can be reformed. And hypnosis is a very powerful tool that allows us to do that rather easily. It allows us to rewire some of those thinking patterns into new, more uplifting, more constructive stories that we are telling ourselves at those deeper subconscious levels. Changing deep-rooted beliefs that have led us into the people-pleasing and the procrastinating and the perfectionism, all of these beliefs that if I do this, I'll be safe. If I do this, people will like me. If I do this, I can succeed. When actually, many of them now have become counterproductive and are preventing success instead of allowing for it, preventing connection instead of enhancing it. And of course, if you'd like to check out tools like hypnosis, I offer them as part of my monthly mindset membership, the Hypno-Pothecary or the Poth. All of those details are available in the show notes. And I hope you found this to be helpful to you as well as interesting. And until we connect the next time, I wish you the most magical and creative rest of your day. Thanks for listening. This is Christine Collins at RavenMosaic.com.